Okay, so this is the Opennebula installation. So this is the first lab sheet for the cloud computing module. What we'll do for this lab sheet is prepare our virtual machine so that you can actually work in your account. And then we will install the software that we need, which is Opennebula, and start running our little cloud in our computers. So before we start, we need to know the way that you will be working. So you all have an allocated computer, and you all have an allocated user account on that computer as well. So what you need to do is you need to log in. So you'll always need to log into the computer with a VM something username and whatever password you've set it up to be after the first time that you log in with that username. And you need to work on that specific computer. Now, the trick to this is that all of the work that we do will not actually happen on the computer itself, on the host. Instead, it will happen inside the virtual machine that we've called Prometheus VM. And so that everything that you do is isolated inside that virtual machine, and you cannot make any mistakes that will cause general system damage to the computer and cause problems to other users that are using the same computer in other lab sessions. So in order to do all this, we need to basically find and start our Prometheus VM. So the VM is already built and configured by us. All you need to do is open it and finalize a couple of the configurations in there. So we will be using VMware Player for this. So if you go to Applications, System Tools, VMware Player, you can start up the program. And then if you select Open a Virtual Machine, you can go and navigate to a folder in your home folder that is called TB2 Prometheus Lab. TB2 stands for Teaching Block 2, which is what we are in now. And find the CentOS 7 custom VMX file and open it. That will load up the virtual machine inside the player, and you can simply power on. It will ask you what do you want to do. You say I copied it, because that will create new hardware IDs for all of the devices inside this virtual machine. And you can tell it to remind you later for the VMware tool because you don't actually need them. At the login screen that you will be presented with, you need to click on the little gray link that says not listed, because you will not log in with the available user. You will log in as root. The reason why we're doing this is because the vast majority of the tasks that you have to perform on this computer will be administrative tasks. So you will need to have enough permissions to run everything instead of you doing sudo all the time, because it will be all the time. So the root password for this user is localhost1, and I would like you to keep it like that. I don't want you to change the root password for your virtual machine. So the setup is you come to the lab, you sit on the computer, you log in as VM1, VM2, whatever your username is, and then immediately the first thing that you do is you start VMware Player, you boot up your Prometheus virtual machine, run it on full screen, log in as root, and do the lab sheets. Go to Moodle, get the lab sheets from there, and follow the instructions. So this is what you will be doing in the future. In order to be able to do this, your Prometheus virtual machine needs to be working correctly. So we need to sort out a few of the details, starting with the networking, which is the most important detail. So the networking inside Prometheus will be on what we call a bridged mode. A bridged mode means that the virtual machine is on the same network as the host computer itself. All of our computers in the lab belong to network 148.197.28. something. Okay, so actually the VLAN addresses that I have allocated to all of you are the last parts of the IP addresses of the computers that we use in the lab. So if you are working on VLAN 65, then your computer is 148.197.28.65. Now, when we're setting up the bridge, the convention that we're using in order to make sure that we don't have duplicate IP addresses in the network is we use whatever IP address you have in your host plus 100. So if you're working on VLAN 65, your virtual machine Prometheus should be basically 165 as the IP address. So once you go into the wired settings and change the network card settings for the IP address for the host, everything else is the same between the virtual machine and the host. So the subnet mask is a default class C subnet mask, the gateway is 28.254, and the DNS server is 28.1. If you click apply on the top right corner, then the network card should be turned on and then you can basically close the network settings. And as a test, you can try pinging google.com from a terminal to see if it actually works. If it works, it means that your network is configured and you have internet access on your newly created Prometheus virtual machine. Once you set up the network, we can basically tidy up the operating system a little bit. So the first thing that I would like you to do is run yum update. This will update all of the packages on the operating system. At the moment, there are about 182 packages. So you can update them so that we make sure that all packages are basically on the same version as everybody else. And you shouldn't really run into any problems with all of this. It should just work without any issues whatsoever. Once this is done, you can disable SE Linux, which is a technology that doesn't allow for changes on certain key files of the operating system from third-party programs. We don't care about that much about this. We want to just make it easier for you to experiment with all of the technologies involved. So you need to disable SE Linux. There is a file that's called /etc/SE-Linux/config. It's the main configuration file for SE Linux. And you need to go in there and change the line that says SE Linux enforcing to SE Linux disabled. Save exit, reboot the virtual machine. Once it reboots, you can basically set it up in full screen. So you can go to the virtual machine menu on the top left and choose enter full screen, and that's it. Another thing that you need to do is you need to disable the firewall. So the most straightforward way to do this is to just open a terminal and type iptables -F. And then last but not least, in order for your Chrome web browser to work, because you're logged in as root and because it's a special security consideration for Chrome, you need to tell it to run in a no sandbox configuration. So you need to find this configuration file for Google Chrome located in user bin, and it's a file called Google Chrome. Go to the very end of the last line of the file and add --no -sandbox to it. Save exit, and then you will be able to run Google Chrome logged in as user root in your Prometheus virtual machine. So run Chrome, go to Moodle, get the lab sheet, and do all the tasks on the lab sheet in there. Another of the reasons why we also use Chrome and not Firefox is because of your logbooks. Your logbooks will be electronic logbooks, and I would like them to be Google Docs. So for maximum compatibility, Google Docs work best in Google Chrome. Of course they do. All right, so you need to create a Google Doc, and you need to keep a logbook of everything that you're doing on your computer, all of the tasks. So any configuration changes that you make, you need to take a screenshot, stick it in the logbook, and explain, I made this change because I wanted to achieve that. All right, so once you do that, then basically that's what the logbook is a listing of all of the tasks, the story of everything that you did on your computer while you were working on it. Once that is done, we can move on to the Opennebula front-end installation. So the front end of the Opennebula is the main program of the cloud that you will be installing, and it is what basically manages all of the resources in the cloud itself. Okay, so each of your computers will be turned.
Sir.
Yes.
Sorry, sir, for interrupting. I have a friend who cannot connect on time for network issue.
Okay.
Now he is in your waiting room.
Okay. However, this is something that I would like to sort out outside of a recorded lecture, please.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So we'll deal with this later. All right. So what we need is we need to install the Opennebula program, the Opennebula software, so that it can manage our cloud system. Okay. So in order to do this, we need to have the front end installed. So in order to do this, the first task that we have for our lab sheet officially, other than setting up Prometheus, is to set up the repository or the repo, which is basically a place where the operating system goes and checks for any software that needs to be downloaded and installed using yum. So we're going to create a new file called Opennebula repo. So you literally type this command in a terminal that will create the file and open it for editing. And you can basically just copy and paste all of this information into that file, because that file contains the websites that are needed for all of the files for the software to be downloaded. Once you create this file, you need to activate the repo that you just created. So you run yum make cache, and then you run yum install Apple release. So then the system will be updated, will read the repo, and then it will know that when you do yum install Opennebula server and Sunstone, it will know where to actually go and download those files from. Opennebula server is the main program that runs the cloud, and Opennebula Sunstone is a small web server, is a web interface that Opennebula uses in order to basically connect and let the user manage everything that's happening in the cloud. Gate and flow are optional components that are simply there to help our little cloud run. Once they're installed, so once the program is actually installed, the first thing that you need to do is you need to create the admin account for Opennebula. So you need to SU as one admin, because that is what the user is called. So you switch to that user, and you use the echo command to edit the contents of the file auth, so that you set the password to localhost 1. So at this point, we have your main computer that you log in as VM1, VM2, or whatever. You then go on to your virtual machine that you log in as root, Prometheus, and then you go inside your Opennebula cloud that you log in as user 1 admin with password of localhost 1. Okay, just so that we have a good idea of what users will be involved in the system that you're using. So you exit that. This here is something that it's just a warning. You don't need to do anything. So you don't need to type this command unless something goes wrong and you want to change your password later on. Okay, but before you do it, call me. All right. And one of the last things that we need to do before we actually start the program, before we start and run Opennebula, is we need to disable Fire Edge, because I don't want to do it. I don't want to use this for this particular module. Fire Edge is basically a graphical user interface. It's a program to manage the cloud. I would prefer to do everything through Sunstone. It does exactly the same job, and it's less complexity for all of you. So all you need to do is you need to go to the Sunstone server conf, find the last 2 lines that have Fire Edge, and put a hashtag in front of them. Once you do that, systemctl start Opennebula and Opennebula Sunstone will start the services for Opennebula on your system. You can check that it's working by going to a command line, going to a terminal, and typing one user show, and it will show you that you have user 0, which is your 1 admin user, and it works. You can also verify that it's working by actually pointing your web browser to localhost 9869. Once you do that, you should be greeted with the Opennebula login page, and you should be able to log in with user 1 admin and a password of localhost 1. If anything goes wrong and it doesn't work, it might be asking for something called Ruby gems. It's rare, but it has happened in the past. If it does, then you need to do this. 99.9% of the cases, it will not happen, so you don't need to worry about this. All right. There's a basic directory structure of where all the files are, configuration files, log files, and everything else. So you can keep this as a reference for the future. And now that we have the front end in place, we can deal with installing the KVM node. So the KVM node feature is another program, another daemon, as we call them in Linux, that manages the virtual machines that are started onto your computer for the cloud. So the cloud starts up, the cloud that we're using, Opennebula, in this particular application, uses KVM as the hypervisor for the virtual machines. So it doesn't use VMware or something or anything like that. It uses KVM, and Prometheus has been specifically configured to include KVM capabilities so that you can actually run your cloud on it. So you need to install Opennebula node KVM, and then you need to restart libvirt d. Once you do that, then the software is in place. And one of the last things that you need to do is you need to configure passwordless SSH. All those virtual machines that will start in your cloud, user one admin must be able to log into them without having to type a password, because the user one admin will work as a service as well. So it will need to be automatically monitoring all of the virtual machines and so on. So you can't possibly be on top of the computer every time so that you have to type your password for the one admin user. So what we need to do is basically switch to the one admin user and use VI to configure the config file. You need to find the line that says host star. It will say strict host key checking yes. You change that to no. And then you create a new line under it and you add user known hosts file dev null to that line. So you save and exit the file. And then you need to change the permissions of the file with chmod 600. And that will set the permissions just as they need to be. As a test that this is working, you need to SSH localhost and see if it connects to the local host without actually asking you for a password. Once you've done that, it's a good idea to try Sunstone again. So you go to localhost 9869, log in as one admin, and you should be able to see the dashboard area with 0 virtual machines, 0 users running. So the system is ready to use for you to go into the next lab sheet and create some virtual machines.